wait, should we say welcome to 2025?
It is 2020. It's our first episode. We're just going to talk a bit of shit.
No, talk.
We haven't posted episodes since last year. It's been a while.
Yeah, did we? Oh, is this? We should say that. Is this already good to go?
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh,
okay.
3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the
Stop
SDS. Well, it's both. It's the Stop Talking Shit podcast and the SDS podcast.
It actually is.
Yeah. And
we haven't recorded in over a year.
It's been a while. It's fine.
Yeah, let's try one more time.
I can edit that out. Sorry.
Okay. No, I like that. Keep that shit in there.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the STS podcast. I'm your...
Yeah.
Sheesh. I told Miriam to leave this behind in 2024, but here we are in 2025.
Bringing those five back.
Still fighting over who goes first.
So, welcome to the STS podcast where we debunk health misinformation circulating social media. Today we have
a very exciting guest on. We have Sabira Wazir. We love to see it. Sabira is just an all-round fantastic human being that I have had the pleasure to meet. Apparently we met in real life at some point. I don't remember. But we met virtually as far as I'm aware.
So not that fantastic then. Can't remember.
Yeah, well, yes, but the
down.
connection nonetheless is the most important. So we would love to let Sabira give herself a little bit of an introduction to you guys, but essentially she is a eating disorder dietitian and counsellor. So Sabira, tell us a little bit about your journey, what you do, and sort of who you are.
Okay, so my name is Sabira, or Sabira, depending on how you want to say it. I am a dietitian. I'm a counsellor. I'm also an eating disorder credentialed clinician. My gosh, that's a tongue twister. So accredited by the Australian New Zealand Eating Disorder Council, I think it is, something like that. I help women and anyone battling with disordered eating, binge eating in particular, and emotional eating, and help them get out of the binge eating cycle and their body image struggles. I do a lot, so I'm like, what else does there? And I help them find food freedom and be confident in their bodies, in a nutshell.
A lot of hats. Okay, do we want to get straight into your area of specialty? How you got into that maybe would be interesting.
Oh, that's a big question. So I guess my whole life I've been struggling. I struggled with disordered eating at a young age, probably through my teens, as it's quite common to get during your teenage years. Image.
What's disordered eating?
Disordered eating is not being happy with the way you look and trying different diets, exercise routines to try to manage your body image. So that's something I probably struggled with. I think being a migrant child added to that, the acculturation, not really fitting in or feeling like I fit in probably added to that, lack of confidence, low self-esteem, and then probably not diagnosed because it was stigma. No one really knew much about it. And then I kind of dibble-dabbled in that, found my way into dietetics. I don't know how. It just literally just came up. And then as I was working, I was studying in dietetics, I was like, oh, I just want to work in eating disorders. We didn't get actually taught much about it. It was always considered the hard topic that you had to do extra postgraduate studies. Sorry, struggling to find my words. It was a passion point. And so 10 years on from graduating, became credentialed, working in the space, and now kind of opening up the doors to do awareness and prevention in schools as well.
Prevention's great.
Especially amongst the Muslim community and the cultured community, I'd like to say, because I feel like there's not much that's tailored to us.
Yeah, and I do want to mention, it's a shameless plug, but the STS podcast, I haven't seen a lot of Muslim women talking about health, and I feel like we are unique in that sense that we target Muslim women or the Muslim community in general. And it's glad to hear that, we have that in common, that you're doing the same thing, trying to give back to your community. I think a man would agree with that sentiment. That's kind of one of the reasons why we started.
Our community is very much targeted by a lot of this sort of weight loss stuff.
Yes.
And a lot of the body image stuff. And
we had that conversation with Fatima as well, saying that there's that lack of representation within our community. And so we define ourselves by, let's say, white culture, because that's where we are residing at the moment. We live in the West and we don't have that, okay, my body shape doesn't necessarily look like the Aussie body shape, but we're trying to achieve that. And that feeds into what you were saying about that sort of disordered eating, because you're trying to achieve a certain body type rather.
I think it's also, it's greater than that. I think with being a person of colour, not only does our body not fit in, but neither is our outfits, neither is the way we present ourselves to the community. So it's funny because I think a lot of people see it as the body, as in like the physical body, but when you speak to people from culture, faith, it's not really about the physical body, it's more of how the body appears to the world and how that's not accepted, essentially. I think to add to that layer, like we've come from the West, but I think a lot of us people of colour, we're also migrants. We're also children of migrants, which adds another layer of complexity of trying to fit in that isn't well understood and also is often forgotten about. And plays a huge role into the body image struggles we experience, the disordered eating we experience. And that's probably why I chose this area as well, because there's no representation within the specific niche of a person of colour trying to fit in, but not trying to fit in terms of like fitting into a swimsuit. It's a lot more than that. And that's often forgotten. And again, we live in a culture where everything is whitewashed, essentially. And unfortunately, even like a lot of the eating disorder prevention awareness programs that are out there are so whitewashed. And I recently went to a school in Sydney and I was speaking to their head school counsellor, and she was like, we tried to get their program into the school, but it just didn't align with our values. It didn't align with the culture. It was not representative of our community. It was completely off. So we couldn't bring that in. But we need it.
Because it wouldn't have been adapted. No. Everyone would have looked at it and be like, oh, no, that's not a class.
I wanted to talk about actually was, because you mentioned disordered eating a couple of times, and I know you explained to our listeners what that was, but I wanted to see if you could explain the difference between disordered eating and an eating disorder. Like what is the key differences, and how do people know they've essentially got a problem, essentially?
Really good question. What you find is that a lot of people actually sit in this disordered eating realm, and disordered eating is when someone's like engaging in dieting behavior, restrictive eating, maybe a little bit of exercise in compensation, so trying to like burn off calories. The fine line between being in that phase of having a disordered eating behavior versus an eating disorder behavior is an eating disorder behavior is a little bit more, how do you say it? Damaging, but also there's a psychological element to it. It's no longer a choice. And that's where you kind of cross over into having a disordered eating behavior, having an eating disorder behavior. Disordered eating behaviors are more like a choice. You're actively like choosing to go on a diet. You're choosing to excessively eat. But when you cross over to having an eating disorder, it actually no longer becomes a choice, and it becomes more of a compulsive behavior. Like you feel like you have to do it. Right? It feels like your whole world will fall apart if you don't control your eating, or if you don't exercise to work off what you've eaten. It really becomes a matter of I'm losing control.
It's like a compulsion.
It's a compulsion. Yeah. But when you're in that disordered eating, you have a little bit more control over the choice of it. It's a really fine line of when you can cross over. And because it's so psychological, you might not even know you're about to cross over.
That would lead me to follow up with, in your space, in your experience, why then is, for example, anorexia nervosa treated differently to binge eating and obesity? I mean, they kind of meet the same criteria in a sense where it becomes like a psychological disorder, but one has a really bad stigma attached and it's just seen like you're just overweight and overeating too much. Anorexia nervosa is treated as a disease. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really good question, actually. It's interesting because a lot of people who struggle with binge eating disorder feel like they don't have an eating disorder because they don't fit into that stigma of anorexia nervosa. Sorry, I forgot the question. But
so why is obesity not labelled and not seen as a disease as much as anorexia nervosa
and binge eating?
Yeah. I think it's also because, again, it's a choice. Everyone thinks obesity or binge eating is a choice, and anorexia is not, essentially. I think it's more accepted as a psychological issue, whereas with binge eating, people are not accepting that there's a psychological component to it. It was really interesting because someone asked me a question. She's asked me this question a few times and I struggled to answer it, but she asked me from an Islamic perspective, like, where does the nafs come in? Like that, when does it become overindulging? When does it become like gluttony, essentially?
Yes, yeah.
And it's a hard question to answer because if it's overeating and overeating by choice with an intention to indulge, that's very different to binge eating out of compulsion because you're struggling emotionally and mentally. So there is a very strong psychological component that is often missed. And that's probably why anorexia nervosa is seen as more serious than binge eating and obesity, because there's no acceptance that there's a psychological there's often blame that you're choosing to do this. Yeah. It's your choice. You just need to stop.
Yeah.
And so everyone thinks that, you can just tell someone to stop binge eating. But there's such a strong connection between their mental health and their emotional well-being and why they're choosing to go down that route of binge eating. And what we often find is, like, with anorexia nervosa, recovery for anorexia nervosa often leads them to binge eating. And that's a very physiological response as well, because when you've got anorexia nervosa, you've been in this starvation phase for so long that when you naturally start eating again, you actually are pulled towards eating more and eating more higher dense, high calorie foods. And that's your body's natural response. So there was actually a study done ages ago when it was legal to starve people, essentially.
So in the 60s, yeah?
Yeah, in the 70s. But it's a really famous study. It's called the starvation study, I think it is.
Sounds legit.
It is. So
it's illegal.
It is literally. Ethical committees were not past this study at the moment, but like essentially what they did was they starved people. And they wanted to see what their responses would be, and how do
you even recruit people for this kind of research?
I think it was, and it was men. It was done on men, but I don't know why. But essentially, they starved people, and then they wanted to see what their responses would be. And what they found was when they starved a person, all they would think about is food, and they forgot about everything else.
Yeah.
So essentially, they starved people and they wanted to see what would happen. So they found that they would just, they obsessed about food. They didn't care about anything else. They would just think about food, draw pictures of food. They started they started putting pictures of food everywhere. And then, so after that, when they fed them again, they found that a lot of them went, naturally craved towards those high density, high calorie foods.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, they put on weight much faster, and they tended to have that kind of pull towards those high density foods for a much longer time after they started feeding again. So which really goes to show that, it's really once you restrict yourself, your body will naturally, physiologically pull you towards that high calorie food because it needs it to survive.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when I went on I did an 8-week challenge. I know there's a few people against challenges, The first thing I did was eat cheesecake. I just wanted cheesecake, and I just ate so much cheesecake every single day. Cheesecake. I pretty much put the 10 kilos back on that I lost. But all I wanted was cheesecake because I was restricting myself for 8 weeks. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I can relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that too as well, being like especially breastfeeding. Like even yesterday I didn't eat properly during the day, and then as the evening went on I said to my husband, I said, I'm really craving wedges. And it was my body I really needed those higher calorie foods.
Yeah.
Because I didn't eat as much as I usually eat, and I kept breastfeeding throughout the day, and so it's like the body just knows.
Yeah.
Like it's like, give me the stuff that's going to get you going ASAP. So especially when you're in tune with that and you've got that awareness, that bodily awareness, which obviously not everyone has that when it comes to this eating disorder space as well. So that kind of that intuition and that sort of bodily awareness and interoceptive awareness, not always there. You're happy to touch on that a little bit?
Yes. So quite often, like with the intuitive eating, I think intuitive eating, mindful eating is like buzzwords of 2024. Let's get rid of them 2025. But essentially where that's lost is when we start to, I guess, diet, but when we start to control our food. And it's lost quite early on. If you really think about it, like if you look at a baby, they're quite intuitive in the way they eat, even toddlers, until we're learned otherwise, right? Until we're taught otherwise. And it starts off with force feeding. It starts off with, oh no, you need to eat more. You need to finish off your plates. And then we start losing that intuition.
It's very culturally wrapped, isn't it?
Yes.
Force feeding.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you really think about it, the reason why a child is force fed is because the mother or the parents or the caregiver feels like the child is not eating enough.
Yeah.
Or they're eating too much, right? And then there's this parent now starting to pass on their thoughts and their feelings around foods to this child, and this child's natural intuition starts to disappear, right? And it starts disappearing quite early, probably about 5, 6, and then so then the natural intuition starts to get lost, and then we're posted into a world where there's a lot of diets, there's a lot of people talking about food restrictions, there's a lot of accessibility to foods.
Can I just say, isn't there a statistic about women trying their first diet when they're like 14 or younger? Sorry, I just had to interject with that.
Yeah, there is. And that's coming from the diet culture world of like body image and body standards. And again, it's a parental influence. So when parents feel like their body is not good enough, they don't want their child to experience that. And so they put on that kind of mindset into their child of like, we need to start we need to handle this young.
Yeah. And they'll often speak about their own body image and weight goals in front of their children, speak about calories. And like, I was at a family barbecue yesterday and I just couldn't enjoy my lunch because everyone kept speaking about calories. Yeah. And then I just thought, all right, my daughter's a baby now. She doesn't fully understand what you guys are talking about, but I just really don't appreciate that sort of dialogue because they're having to think about things that are so unimportant in their stage of development and life. Children they should worry about play and toys and fun. They shouldn't be having to worry about, is this a high calorie food? Is this like, a food that's going to make me fat or, do I children shouldn't have to worry about that.
And I think, I don't know if it was a study or was spoken about by a dietitian online, but she spoke about how they, in prep, girls, as young as prep, they're talking about body image and weight loss and fat. So 5-year-olds were talking. Yeah.
So the average age that a young person starts a diet is 10, but that number is dropping.
It's crazy.
So it's as young as 5 and 6 now that they start worrying about what they're eating, about how their body looks. And unfortunately, I'm not one to blame parents because every parent's trying the best they could, but it's coming from the diet culture generation, which is anyone within the age bracket of like 70 and 30 that's probably experienced diet culture somewhere through their life, whether that's from their parents or Weight Watchers or jumping on Wii Sports and getting your weight and height checked because, that's what they do to measure, things, whether it's from doing the beep test or the health education at schools. There was always a focus on weight and putting someone's body into a category of healthy, overweight, underweight. And that's passed on that your body can be changed and you need to do whatever you can to change it. So that mindset's passed on, and in such subtle ways, each generation passes it on to the next because our own insecurities pass on, and unless someone decides to stop it. And when that person decides to stop it, that next generation gets less of it. And what we're finding is this generation, whatever's going on at the moment with all the body positivity, the awareness that's going on, this generation is starting to stop. But there's so much work that needs to be done, especially in our communities. There's so much work to be done because I guess, so it passes on. That diet culture, the diet mindset passes on from generation to generation in such subtle ways. And if you think about it, like if you think about your little one, she looks up to you. She thinks you're the best. She thinks you're perfect, right? And then if you start going, I'm not that perfect, and you start talking in a way that puts yourself down, well, then she kind of looks at you going, if you're not perfect, then I'm not perfect. And if whatever you're doing to change your body, I need to start doing it. And it starts as young as they start realizing that.
Because kids mirror us.
Yeah, they mirror us, and they think we're their role models, right? And so when we start changing the language you use around ourselves, our children are going to change the language they use.
It's a lot of responsibility being a parent.
I know, right?
We could potentially ruin the next generation. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
It does feel a bit overwhelming sometimes when you think about how much what you do has an impact.
But it's not only
like you said, every parent is doing the best that they can, and it's being open to that. It's being open to, all right, what can I do better? Or maybe this is a bit problematic or harmful as a behaviour in front of my children. How can I change that? Like it's also being open to that, accountability and doing better and learning to do different.
Yes,
as well.
Yeah, I did I mentioned that we're a blended family. I got divorced. There was a lot of trauma around that. And I did like some counselling. And I remember I did it with Khadija, motherhood coach. And I was concerned about my older child. And I was like, he's been through so much. How can I change his mindset and behaviours? And the first thing she said to me was, change your mindset and behaviours. And he will automatically change. And that's just stuck with me, that it's not about... So, we are the role models. So if we change, like Iman was saying, the way we think, kids will automatically pick up on that. Kids will automatically pick up on our language, and having conversations with our kids, then they'll be open-minded to their own selves making mistakes if we can acknowledge our own mistakes. And I just thought that was quite a mind shift, where I was so focused on helping him out. I was just like, no, if I help myself out and change my behaviours and my mind, then he will automatically pick up on the feelings.
I would argue that just applies to life.
Yeah. And I also think it's not only the mother, it's not only the parent, it's the communities as well. The community has a really big impact on the child. Like, again, it takes a village,
it really does,
right, to raise a child. And it's one of the reasons why I started doing schools as well, like working with schools and changing the school environments is something that I'm passionate about, because it's not only the mum, it's not only the dad, it's not only the parents, it can also be older siblings. And, as we're talking, one of my clients come to mind, she's like a 15-year-old girl, and it's not only her mum that's kind of struggling with her own body image that's kind of projected onto this girl, but it's also her older sisters, right? It's also her aunties. It's also her grandparents. It's also, that teacher that she has. It's the community, and it's the way the community talks about their body. It's can you walk into an event and not have your body commented on? Or can you serve food without someone going, hey, should you really be eating that, and judging? So it like the parents obviously have a huge role, but it's not only that, it's the community that they are in and environments that are in that play a really big part
and
as well.
aunties are brutal in that way.
They
They'll
are.
immediately see you be like, you put on weight. Oh, why are you a bit plumpy here? And then, oh, this is a bit too much. Auntie, I don't know. Do you have experience with aunties? Aunties are brutal when it comes to so.
I found it more with my own family, and more when I started actually training at the gym. I remember my parents were saying to me, like, you're getting too muscly. Gym is only for people with a certain body type. And they were like, oh, you're getting too fat. Like, no, they were basically like, you're like, what you're doing is not like that's not necessary.
With the best intentions.
With the best intentions, yes.
Trying to look out for you.
Yeah. Meanwhile, they got like unmanaged diabetes, like, heart disease. Because that's what my dad used to say. Do you know what I mean? And I've been trying to encourage my parents to like move their bodies in a very like low impact fashion for a long time, in terms of just start going for walks, like get outside in the sunshine, Exactly. Like that. But yeah, I definitely find that with my in-laws, everyone comments on. I mean, sorry if you guys are listening to this, but you probably will. But they comment on bodies and food a lot. Like yesterday at the family barbecue, they were talking about how much calories is in the cheesecake, and they just kept harping on about it, like. And then, like, how they're trying to work out, like, per slice, like, how. And I'm like, dude, we're at a family barbecue. It's New Year's Day.
Just eat.
Like, just enjoy the cake and move on. It's so hard for people to find that balance because they do get so caught up in, and like you said earlier, people don't necessarily realize that they're doing it. Yeah. And once you're someone that's recovered from that, because I've spoken with Sabira online about my history and journey with orthorexia, which is like an obsession with healthy eating. Once you're out of that, then you just, and you see it, you're like, oh my God, this is so frustrating. I don't want to hear this. So it's very hard.
Impacts kind of differently.
Right? Yeah. And trying to get people in your family to sort of to see that in a different light is very hard, because those thoughts start to become so ingrained. It's like when we finish. Sorry to cut you off, Sabra. It's like when we finish uni and we're like, I have to eat organic, and you mentioned in our last podcast that you wouldn't buy veggies if you couldn't get organic. It's just a full mindset. And it's like it's a lifestyle, and there's all these beliefs that mesh into it. Yeah. It's like a complete system. Yeah. When I talk about, like, we'll talk about the whole organic, like low tox, it's like a whole system of life. And I'm just going to throw this in the anti-vax. Like it's just everything goes together, and then trying to get people to just unpack that and tackle one side of that also means that other parts of that need to be tackled, and it's like a complete system.
It's a belief system, as you said.
It is. Yeah. And you know what, like, if you really like dig deep and go, why is that there? It's this belief that that's healthy. Yeah. That's health, and therefore we all need to do it. Yeah. And I think with eating disorders as well as everything you just mentioned, it's this belief that if I need to be healthy, I need to do this. And it comes, like, all of these comments are masked with, good intent, right? They think they're doing the right thing. They think that if they tell you that you're a bit bigger or a bit plumpy, or that you're going to do something about it, and that's going to help your health and wellness, where in fact, it might for the short time help with your physical health, but the mental health damage that it does is just huge.
I would... if I could touch on, I'll get your expertise in this area. Do you notice, so the studies do point that it is more of a low socioeconomic issue in terms with public health realm when it comes to obesity. What are your thoughts and experiences on that? Do you feel like it is more migrant, low socioeconomic backgrounds, or do you more feel like it's across the board?
I feel like it's across the board. Okay. I think there's certain communities that are more disadvantaged when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to financial privileges that they might have. Health education. Actually, you know what? It's not even health education. It's probably more like accessibility. I think a lot of people know. You know what? I'll speak from a migrant lens. Like when you come. Like if you look at our cultural diets, again, I think you spoke about this with Fatima. Yep. If you look at our cultural diets, they are really rich in, natural food, like fruits, veggies, a good variety. But when you come to a different country, you don't have access to the same things.
Yeah.
Fresh produce isn't as accessible, or familiar fresh produce isn't as accessible. And then you're struggling with finances, and all of these other foods become cheaper to buy than, you know, your fruits and veggies. And so you're trying to survive. You're also trying to fit in, right? And that's a huge part. Like, you know, you pack your child's lunch boxes, and you put your cultural foods in, and they're coming back going, everyone's eating a Vegemite and cheese sandwich.
Rolled up salsa sandwich.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and it would like sog through the
And then you see the Nutella and the what do you call it? The fairy bread, and you're like, and they're looking at your food, and you're looking at their food, and you're like, what?
And then you're like, you want to fit in, and so you ask your parents for that, and they don't know, they don't understand. It's different, it's new, and they're like, okay, well, whatever you need to fit in, whatever you need to feel comfortable, and then we start changing what we eat in order to fit in, and that, I guess, that's part of it as well, right? You know what? There's a lot of things with obesity. I think with the push of diet culture, with the push of trying to lose weight, we are, we're rejigging our systems to actually put on weight quicker.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of, like, again, the study that I spoke about, if the more we restrict, the faster it is to put on weight, the more we're inclined to eat high-dense, high-calorie foods. So that's probably adding to the obesity epidemic, or whatever you want to call it.
So how would binge eating fit into that that study? So you're talking about starvation, but binge eating isn't really, you're not really starving yourself. So overcompensating,
Yeah.
So how would you redefine that?
So let's define what binge eating is. So binge eating is when you excessively eat, regardless of how much you've eaten during the day. So you can restrict, and then you can, overeat at the end of the day, but it can also happen just because you've had this emotional drive to eat, right? So it's not, there's not always a physiological component to binge eating.
Okay.
It can be a very emotional component. It's a coping strategy for a lot of people. So with that study, what we found was if you restrict, you are more likely to binge, right? So that plays a huge part in the binge restrict cycle. But binge eating can happen irrespective of restriction as well. And that's where the psychological component comes in. Does that answer the question?
Yep. That's what exactly.
Yeah. I would love to just touch on the ADHD component now. Obviously, our listeners that have been following for a while know that I'm very passionate about ADHD. So can you touch a little bit on your, I guess your clinical experience and a little bit of your expertise, sort of working with someone that might be binging for completely psychological reasons or due to restriction, or with someone that has ADHD, might not necessarily have binge eating disorder, but sort of demonstrates sort of patterns of binging?
Good question. So when it comes to ADHD and binge eating, I think the first thing is the binging happening because of the ADHD?
Yeah.
Or is the binging separate from the ADHD? That's a really important distinguishing factor because of, like, the high executive functioning with ADHD, the hyperfixation that happens as well. You can forget to eat. ADHD can forget to eat. Meal planning becomes harder. Preparing, like, the whole process of trying to cook is sometimes
lots of executive function.
A lot of executive function related to even just preparing meals. And so, is the binging occurring because we're forgetting to eat because we've hyperfixated on a task, or because to actually prepare a meal, the executive functioning we're not having? So it's really important to figure out why the binging is occurring, and if, again, diagnose, medication might help with reducing some of that binge eating behavior. But then also binge eating can occur separately. It can be again, I would say binge eating is more of coping mechanisms for other things that might be going on.
Yeah.
That's separate from the ADHD. So it's really important to distinguish.
Yeah. And I'd love to just share a little bit of my own, I guess, experience or also expertise in this area. But I find that asking all the questions and understanding that, like you said, the drivers, because, are they seeking dopamine through food? Especially when you find that one thing that really hits that spot, for that emotional sort of regulation. And then also with people that have ADHD, but you might also see this with people that, I've seen this with some clients that have PTSD or complex PTSD or other sort of conditions where that interoceptive awareness in terms of what are my hunger cues, what are my fullness cues.
Yeah.
They don't experience necessarily hunger and fullness the same way we do. So the sensation of like hunger and fullness, the way that feels in like neurotypical people is not necessarily the same.
Yeah.
In neurodivergent people. So there's also that piece to it as well. Outside of all the executive functioning stuff, it's more how things kind of feel in their body, and also because I don't know if this is unrelated to the podcast, but I don't know if you've seen RDs for neurodiversity.
Yeah.
She does good. She talks a lot about like sensory processing differences.
Yes.
Yeah, so I did some of her training, and that was really interesting as well because obviously having access to like safe foods. I mean, you mentioned access.
Yeah.
Access to foods that feel safe or foods that are appropriate from a sensory perspective. So all of these things, obviously, in someone who's neurodivergent, will have an impact on that food relationship. So, in regards to what Sabra is saying, for some people, addressing those fixes that piece in terms of if they are binging because they don't have access, for example, to foods that meet those sensory needs. Then if we're creating and setting up, a lifestyle for them that meets all those needs, then they might stop binging, for example, right? So I guess it's so important to look at the whole picture.
Yes. And even with the interoceptive sensations, even for neurotypical people, we can struggle with that because we can lose that interoceptiveness. And I think with diet culture, it actually takes us away from being interoceptive. It takes us away from being intuitive. It takes us away from being mindful. And that's where, like, I guess this intuitive eating and mindfulness has become, so much more prominent. But if you actually look at it, it should just be the way of life, because we should be responding to our body's needs. We should be listening to our body, and our body is quite smart in telling us what it needs. Like, we respond to it in pain, but for some reason we don't respond to it when it's like, I'm hungry. We tell ourselves, no, you're not. It's
you
really
ate 5 minutes ago.
Yes.
You can't be hungry.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what? I actually had this question a while. Someone asked me this question. She's like, I think I'm intuitively eating. Can you tell me if I am or not? And she was like, when I have a burger, I decide that half is enough for me. And she's like, isn't that intuitive eating? I said, no, because you're deciding before you start eating. Intuitively eating is you're eating that burger, and as you eat it, you're feeling the sensations. You're feeling, oh, this is, I'm starting to feel full, or I'm satisfied with this, and then you stop whenever you stop. Right? Whether that's half, whether that's like a couple of bites over half.
Whether that's into your second burger.
Whether that's into your second burger.
For me, that's...
Right? You deciding that half is enough is restriction, right? But you eating that burger and then kind of going, oh, you know what, this is enough for me, whatever that looks like, that's intuitive eating. That's being mindful. I think intuitive eating and mindfulness.
Very mindful.
Very intuitive eating and mindfulness are quite similar. I think intuitive eating they've kind of, the great dietitians have kind of, what's it called? They've made it into principles. They've kind of structured it, but essentially
made it like this big bougie, like way of life that everyone should, and it's not. I get what you're saying. It's meant to come naturally.
It's meant to come naturally.
It's
got a touch of lightness,
but
which I try to pull away from. That's why I'm like, I'm
giving Captain Cook.
Yeah, we're gonna take a bit of the principles.
It's giving colonization.
Yeah, we're gonna take a bit of the principles and then do it our way, and actually do it quite
intuitively.
I don't know if you are well versed in the Islamic aspect of eating, but if it wasn't a problem, or wasn't going to be a problem, obesity, for example, for the Ummah, Islam wouldn't have put structures in place to prevent it. So Islam just says things like, eat to your third full, third food. Even with the way you're positioning yourself to eat, you're supposed to sit on the floor and you're supposed to have your knee up towards your stomach, so on your left side. So, and Islam is overeating, so you've got pressure on there.
Islam also encourages being seated while eating,
chewing,
seated while drinking,
mindfulness,
eating with
intuitive eating,
eating in a community. We're now, I guess, that can be a whole topic in itself. But we isolate ourselves so much eating alone, and that can lead to a lot of overeating.
But can I add to that, just from the neurodivergent space? Some people can't eat in social settings,
and that's because of sensory issues.
Yes,
that's because there's too much going on.
Yeah, which is totally separate from when people want to binge alone or in secrecy or things like that, right? It's such a big conversation because there's so many things to consider, and each person is so individual.
Yeah. But did you know that in the Mecca times, it was shameful to eat on your own? They would actually starve and not eat until someone came along and ate with them, which is almost completely opposite to the way we eat now.
And it's very opposite to binge eating as well. So, and the way diet culture goes against our traditions in so many ways. It really kind of, but essentially diet culture, it promotes eating by yourself. It promotes taking yourself away. It shuns you away from
your plate.
Yes, it really kind of
eating from
separates.
the same plate.
Yes.
There's blessings in eating from the same plate. Even as Jordanians, we have the Mensa.
Yeah.
Everyone eats from one big tray.
Yeah. We all
with your hands.
Yeah.
There's so much into it that's actually so beneficial for us that is completely been stripped.
And if you think about it, one of the reasons why
that leads to a lot of problems. Yeah.
One of the reasons why that's communal eating is really pushed in culture is because we want to be intuitive. That's the whole point. You eat as much as you can. You share the food amongst yourself. It's not let's just focus on me and what I've eaten. And when you focus on yourself too much, you can become hyper focused on yourself, and that really takes you away from everything. And when you said Islamically, we have structures in what we're taught to eat, preventive, mindfulness measures. Islam also does not tell us, we need to be a certain shape, size, body. It actually just says look after your body. That's it. Right? It doesn't say, spend your whole life trying to get to certain kilos. It says nourish your body. This is what you need to do to look after your body, whatever that looks like for you. Right? But for some reason, it's been taken on as I need to lose weight because my
body's an amana.
Because my body's a amana. And I'm like, well, hang on. Why don't you just start looking after this body that you have, and whatever that does, whatever that body chooses to do, just be happy with it. Eat right, eat what you think is beneficial for your body now. Yeah. Do what's beneficial for your body now. Take care of the body that you have now, and then let your body flourish in its own way, right? Because Allah has created us differently. Right? We're not all created the same way. Allah didn't say this is ideal. Go strive towards that. It's this is the body I've given you. Whatever it is, even if that body is at a higher weight category or not, just look after that body and let that body flourish in whatever way. Because if that body flourishes, that mind will flourish, and then you can achieve whatever your purpose is in life.
Yeah, that's so profound. So I'm going to click into that.
And if you think about it, communal eating, you're talking and eating. So if you're sitting with someone, and that's a whole aspect that's been taken away as well, if you're sitting and you're talking, you're likely to feel the sensation of fullness if you're taking that break. Whereas if you're just completely eating on your own, you're not going to be in tune with that sensation of fullness. And by the time, we have this problem where we're not chewing our food, so we're not feeling we're overeating because we're not feeling full because we're eating too fast. But that communal eating, you're talking, you're taking a break, you're having a sip of water, you're feeling full by 2 or 3 bites, for example. It's a whole system.
I think even before fullness, when you eat with people, you feel satisfied. And I think that satisfaction comes way before fullness. Your heart is full, your mind is full, you're just in good company, right? And I think sometimes we also like focus. I think this is why I have a problem with like the intuitive eating principles is there's so much focus on hunger and fullness.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, the in-between is satisfaction. So what are we doing to achieve that? Because when you're satisfied, your satisfaction isn't just your tummy being full.
I'm feeling this. Yeah.
Satisfaction is like your mind and your body just being like at peace with and that's why like when you go out to like brunch with a friend,
eating with friends.
Exactly.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah.
There's so
Even
much
if the food
So
is
much
shit.
satisfaction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And satisfaction is just another level, and that's why I always I say to my clients,
It's
we're aiming.
not measured.
No, it's not.
And it's not, as you said, it's not even part of the criteria of eating and binge eating and this whole epidemic that we're facing with obesity and it's not even in there.
No.
Yeah.
And it should be, because it's like that's what we're aiming for, right? Satisfaction.
Yeah.
Like and
satisfaction. Sorry, I just had to. Yeah.
And that's if you when you take a deep dive into someone who's struggling with binge eating, you'll find that the reason why they're binging is they're looking for satisfaction, they're looking for calm, they're looking to get away from the chaos.
Yes.
They feel out of control in their life.
Eating, yeah.
They're comforting themselves on multiple levels, right? And you know what? Food gives that to us, and I'm not going to shy away from that. It does, right? If you think about it, like if a baby cries,
it's part of our life. Yeah.
If a baby cries, we feed it because that's what gives the baby comfort. So it's a big part of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just how do you have other coping mechanisms? What's the root of why you're binging? Let's get to that. Let's work on that, because there's so much more to binge eating than just the food. And I want to dig that deep into everyone's mind. Binge eating isn't just about the food. And you'll again, as I speak to my clients, that's the one thing they say. It's like, I don't really care about the food. It's everything else, but the food has such a big hold on them because it gives them that sense of control, comfort, pleasure. Something that I think I wanted to say, and it came up in my mind a couple of times when we were talking, was a lot of people think binge eating is about eating one particular food in excessive quantities. That's not what binge eating is. Binge eating is when you will eat everything and anything. Right? There's not one particular food that you'll overeat on. It will be multiple different types of foods. And for some people, it's whatever they can get their hands on. Kids who binge eat, it will be whatever they can get their hands on, whether that's bread with butter.
Whatever's quick.
Whatever's convenient.
Usually high-calorie dense food.
Yeah, whatever's convenient.
Package, grab it.
Yep.
Easy, it's in the pantry.
Yeah. Do you work with many children, Sabira? Or more so adults?
My youngest is 12. I haven't worked with younger because working with younger is actually working with the parents. There's a lot of parental involvement, and actually they don't come because parents have to face the realities of their role in the child's life. And
I could, yeah.
And so
I could open up Pandora's box there.
Yes. So 12 is where I normally start working one-on-one with the adolescent. That's the age where I find that they have a little bit more say and control into what they're eating, and therefore it's easier to work with. That being said, when it comes to binge eating, and I cringe to say this and I would cry actually, but when it comes to binge eating at the younger age level, a lot of parents come to me going, can you just tell my child to stop eating?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you just put my child on a diet? And they hate me when I go, well, no, I can't put your child on a diet because that's going to make the problem worse. And I go, well, there's a bigger problem here that needs to be addressed, and the parents can't accept it. They're like, no, you just need to tell them to stop eating all the junk. And then I'm like,
you're the problem.
Again, putting children and also us at the center in terms of making all these decisions and having the strength and courage to be able to do all of that.
Yeah.
I just, I'm conscious of obviously your role as a counsellor and how much mental health in general impacts food choices.
Oh yeah.
I'm just thinking about people that are going through depression, people that are anxious, and how all that impacts food. Like I remember when I was going through depression, I couldn't cook. It wasn't even the ADHD picture. It was just like, I don't have the mental capacity to get up and make a meal. It was just so hard. let alone all the appetite stuff,
Yeah.
you know. But I think, like there's a lot of people navigating lots of different mental health issues in general that, you know, impacts a lot in terms of their relationship with food, their ability to make meals, to enjoy the satisfaction that food provides.
And this is the reason why I became a counsellor. Actually, because when I started working, when people would come to me as like a pure dietitian and be like, I've got diabetes, I've got, you know, heart disease, I need to, you know, fix that up, and with diet and lifestyle, well, they had stress and they had anxiety and they had depression that would stop them from actually doing what they needed to do to manage their, you know, chronic health conditions. And I was like, well, it's really hard to change someone's behavior when they're not in the right mindset to do it. So then I went on to become a counselor because I'm like, okay, I want to help people with their mindset so that they can actually do the behaviors that they need to look after themselves physically. And then as you work with the mind and you work with the stress and reducing the anxiety, helping them come out of that depression, what you find is they're very capable. They're very capable of making those choices to you know, look after their health and well-being with their food choices and with their lifestyle choices. And so I guess with that, with what Iman was saying was like, yes, it's hard to cook, it's hard to prepare a dish, it's hard to prepare a meal, it's hard to go shopping when you're anxious and when you're stressed and when you're overwhelmed. Decision fatigue is huge when you're experiencing that. But I think before you try it, because a lot of people come and they'll be like, oh, I need to just change the way I eat so I can, you know, so my depression, anxiety gets worse. I'm like, no, we need to address the anxiety and depression because that's impacting your ability to make choices. And once you start doing that, everything starts working out. But that to be able to do that, you need to be aware that you're struggling with that, and you need to be aware that it's impacting your choices, right? There's a conscious awareness that needs to be had where you go, I am struggling to prepare a meal because I am feeling depressed, right? And once you can make that link, right, well, then you can start working on that. But when everyone thinks that, oh, if I fix my eating, my depression will get better.
Or if I start, you know, if I treat my gut, if I eat some probiotics, my depression's going to, like, this is my ick at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's like, yes, food can impact on your mental health, but the impact is not what people are making it out to be. You know, that depression is caused in the gut. Sorry, babes, but most of that serotonin made in the gut doesn't even make it to the brain. I was reading about this recently, like with some research articles. So I feel like so much of, again, people are trying to find more ways that they can control what they eat to fix everything.
Yeah.
And what you're essentially saying is, hang on, the food isn't the focus. Yeah. Let's focus on what's going on internally.
Yeah, people will avoid that at all costs.
They will.
They will. 1,000 supplements.
This program is going to help with weight loss because...
But they'll avoid that. They will avoid that at all costs.
You know, like, I sometimes have discovery calls with people and they're like, okay, so I need to start eating better. I need to work on my dieting behavior. And I'm like, okay, cool. But we're working at, like, when, obviously it really depends on the person, but essentially, like, 95% of my population, we need to work on their mental health before we can actually touch on the food, right? A lot of my binge eating clients, you'd be surprised that I say this because CBTE for binge eating doesn't really say this, but CBT is like the cognitive behavioral therapy for binge eating, and the structure that, you know, has been put out there is work on the food first. And my structure is always like, will be, let's work on your mind first. Let's get you into the right mindset so that you can start working on the food. And my clients have seen results, like, because when your mind is in the right place, things just fall to place, and then you can work on the actual problems that come up. A lot of my clients' problems get fixed when they start working on their mind, and then it's just about troubleshooting the food stuff. Sometimes we don't talk about food for well into like halfway through session, like, you know, the time we've worked together. You know, I had a client, it's really interesting. We've been working together for a year now with binge eating disorder. We hardly talk about food. Hardly, because food is their coping mechanism. So I'm like, well, we need to work on what you're coping with first before we try to take away your coping mechanism. And guess what? Her coping mechanism, her binge eating reduced. She has less. I think we're on 6 months between binges now, which is huge for someone with binge eating. But we have not actually sat down and gone, what are you eating? Right? We've just been like working around that, going, what's causing your binging, right? And we're currently at the stage where we're going, what are we eating? Because we're kind of trying to fine tune everything.
I think it's really hard for people to admit. So it's easier to blame something else than to blame yourself.
Exactly.
So it's really hard for people to be like, no, it's actually I have a problem, and maybe that no one wants to feel like a failure. And that's really hard. So I failed myself in that aspect, or I failed in that aspect, or I wasn't in control. So that's the problem there.
Yeah.
It's not me.
And
It's
I
not
think,
me.
yeah, and I think people with particular mental health conditions are more prone to feeling like they need to control stuff. I'll see it with my husband, because my husband's got clinical OCD.
Yeah.
And he's not obsessed with calories, but there's a bit of a hyperfixation around, you know what I mean? Like there's a lack of flexibility around a lot of things when it comes to diet in general, but in diet and eating. Like
Is he
food and
fixated
exercise.
on like labels? Like does he? I like this brand. I like this particular brand. This
No,
is the only brand
not
I'm
so
getting,
much. Not so much, but it will, it'll be like, I didn't exercise today. I might not eat this. Or he was like talking about like the calories in the cake, for example. There's definitely a bit of a hyperfixation. It's an element of control. I just see it.
So my question is, why? Why does he do it?
Again,
But
Right?
like,
Where did it come from?
Yeah.
What's causing
Body
this?
image issues, 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
What's the backstory for why this behavior is happening
but you
at the
can
moment?
see how all that is almost avoidant to really address the.
Because if you think about it, the more you ask why is this happening, the more you have to look at yourself.
Yeah.
And you have to like literally face yourself in the mirror and like go, what's happened in my life to kind of get to this point? What do I need to change? Yeah, why do I feel that need?
Yeah.
And it's really like it's looking at yourself in the mirror in such a raw form that a lot of people are not ready for.
Scary.
It is,
because it's like, if I go down that tunnel, how far is it going to take me?
Yeah.
And I don't know am I going to be able to cope with that?
Yeah. And most Arabs don't like to say that, their family has played a role in.
but they also don't like to say that that they're not confident.
Yeah.
Right, that they're struggling with low self-esteem, because you need to be proud. You need to be outwardly out there, but they might be struggling a lot internally.
Yeah.
But
especially if their body has gone through changes. That's what I feel.
Remember that conversation we had?
Yeah.
About
new
mums.
Yeah.
And their body changing, and then feeling like they need to go back into their I'm
even like I have my phases even for myself. Like I have days where I'm like, I'm confident, I'm so hot, and then I have days where I'm like, nothing fits me right, because I've got this hens night on the weekend, and I didn't think I'd struggle this hard to find something that I was confident in. And it really started to play on my mind. I was like, oh my God, like you got to, numbers doesn't matter to me so much, like wearing a bigger size than what I wore before. But it's like, oh, this wasn't a problem. This was not a problem I had before.
Yes.
And now it is. And then it's like, now I'm thinking about it. But then it's having those conversations with yourself and being like, hang on, your body did go through change. It's not that deep. You did have a baby. And
sharing that with other women.
Yeah, and just welcoming
comfort.
Welcoming that change. And like you're not gonna I've gone through this huge process of transformation, as both of you have, like 3-4 times each. And so you're not gonna be the same as what you were before.
No,
even if you wanted to be.
My shoe size has changed.
Oh, my shoe size has changed.
The position where my fat,
I think I've shrunk
body
as well.
has changed.
I've
shrunk as well.
I don't think I'm that tall anymore.
3 centimeters. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 3 centimeters.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like I would have really.
My fingers are fat. Like none of
rings don't fit as differently.
It's the wider.
Yeah. But I really want to hone in on what you said, because you essentially said I had to talk to myself and change the way I thought, right? And so that really, really speaks to where body confidence comes in, right? It's the way you speak to yourself, right? It wasn't, oh, I needed to change, I needed to go on this, fad diet, or I needed to like exercise a million times to get to that confidence. It was, I just needed to change the way I thought about it.
100%.
Right.
And even with like me trying to get back into the gym, and I'm not putting pressure on that was really important for me, to not put pressure on myself to like hit any targets or focus on any numbers at all. I was like, if I can show up to the gym for my mental health and for something, just for my overall well-being a few times a week, I'm happy with that. The numbers, the quantity, the time spent, none of that matters. If I can just be active, then that's amazing, So
and we're not about no excuses, get to the gym.
Exactly.
No pain, no gain. We're not that.
Yeah, nah. And I sometimes have to have that conversation with even like, people around me as well. Because even like, there's so many people in my life that are in the fitness industry. Like I've got family, in-laws, everyone's a PT like these days. So everyone is very much in that space. And I remember having a chat with my sister about it once, and then she was like, oh, but you haven't really like started training. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not trying to go crazy at the moment, because
why do you need to be?
Exactly. Oh, there she
You have a baby, and that's your priority at the moment. It's not your body.
Exactly.
When it comes to kids and this whole parental dynamic, is the parent is like overfeeding or taking them out, for takeaway too many times a week, or there's access to all of these different types of foods, like free access. The kids don't really have a mealtime; they're just eating constantly when they're bored, when they feel like it. And then the parent comes and goes, "Can you please fix this problem? Can you please tell my child to stop eating? Can you please tell her to stop grabbing all the snacks? She's finishing all the school snacks before they can take it to school." And the parents are coming to me with this. They're like, tell them to stop. And they're not willing to take any of the blame of it for purchasing it or for having it accessible or not stepping up and putting some boundaries in place. But I'm like, this child is hearing all of this. Like, the mental health of this child matters, right? Because they are told they're doing something wrong, but no one's putting boundaries in place around it. No one's guiding them. No one's supporting them. And that is a recipe for an eating disorder. That is a recipe for anxiety. That's a recipe for disaster in so many ways, right? Because for a lot of young people, what tips them over into dieting behavior, body image issues, eating disorder behavior is one comment. That can be enough. Like one thing. There's so many kids that have walked in through my doors, and it would be like, oh, the doctor said I would be I would essentially die if I don't lose weight. And I'm like, okay, so this child is not coming to me because they want to lose weight. They're coming to me because they're scared. They've got fear. They've got anxiety. Food is a problem now, right? And it's a problem for all the wrong reasons, right? I think we forget that. We forget that the child is a human and they have feelings and they have thoughts and feelings that often forgotten. When there's this talk about food, then there's talk about obesity, then there's talk about health, and it gets passed on with through the parents, the community.
And it's not sustainable anyway. Even if you fear them, you try to scare them, that's not something that's actually going to be a motivating factor. It just makes them scared.
No, fear gets people nowhere.
Yeah, so as I was saying, like my younger sister, they put her on a restrictive diet. It goes for a week. That's it. Doesn't matter what fear you put, even on the parent. It doesn't address the underlying causes as, okay, why is she doing this? Agreed. Why are you doing this? What mindset have you created around food? Yeah. It doesn't address any of the underlying issues. Yeah. Fear isn't a motivating factor.
No, it's
neither is
not.
Shame.
Neither is shame. Neither is shame. Something that's been on my mind in particular recently is like this, how people judge people's bodies and how social anxiety becomes a lot more common because now people are scared to go out because they're scared that their bodies will be judged. they're scared that people will comment on their foods. Yeah, that's just, yeah.
And they stay in the privacy of their home eating more and more and more.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add, Iman?
No, I feel like that was a hectic discussion.
That was
It
huge.
was. It got really good.